Welcome to a deep dive into Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince. You've given us quite the reading list on this one. Excerpts, commentaries, historical context. Someone's been doing their homework?
And that's what we love to see. We're going deep on this one, dissecting Machiavelli's core arguments, pulling back the curtain on the figures and events that shaped his thinking.
Because there's always more to uncover, right? Like, this book, it's notorious. But is it really as simple as everyone thinks?
That's the question, isn't it? And that's precisely what we're here to explore. While the prince doesn't shy away from, let's say, the less pleasant aspects of power, there's so much more to it than that surface level.
Which is why it's still being debated, what, 500 years later?
Exactly, and often misinterpreted, like that whole the ends justify the means thing. Not quite what Machiavelli was getting at.
Right. It's easy to slap a label on it, call it a guidebook for tyrants.
When in reality, it's a far more nuanced and frankly fascinating exploration of leadership and statecraft.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit, because let's be real. When we hear Machiavellian, we tend to think, well, ruthless ambition, cunning manipulation, basically the bad guys, right? But is that really the whole story?
Not even close. It's true. The prince doesn't sugarcoat things. It dives headfirst into the grittier realities of power. But Machiavelli's arguments are a lot more pragmatic, a lot more insightful than that simple label suggests.
Which is what makes this whole exploration so interesting, right? It's like this book has a reputation, but then you actually read it.
And you find a complex, thought-provoking work, one that's been distorted over the centuries, often willfully, I might add.
Right. Like people love to quote that, "It is better to be feared than loved" line, as if it's some kind of how-to guide for cruelty and deception, as if those are the only paths to success.
When, in context, Machiavelli's point is much more nuanced. He's not advocating for tyranny. He's simply acknowledging a harsh reality. Sometimes, especially in turbulent times, a leader needs to project an aura of strength, of decisiveness.
Because projecting weakness, especially in a world that's already chaotic, well, that just invites more chaos, doesn't it?
Precisely. And Machiavelli, living through the Italian Renaissance, he'd seen his fair share of that. Remember, this was a time of intense political upheaval. City-states constantly vying for power, foreign armies meddling in their affairs.
So it's less about being Mr. Nice Guy and more about, like, securing the state, right? Maintaining stability at all costs.
Precisely. Survival was often at stake. And that, Machiavelli argued, required a different kind of approach, one that recognized human nature's complexities, and that often unpredictable current of history, which leads us to one of the most crucial themes in The Prince, the interplay of virtue and fortuna.
Two very loaded words, and I think key to unlocking Machiavelli's whole philosophy. So let's break those down a bit, shall we?
Absolutely. Fortuna, or fortune, it represents that fickle finger of fate, right? The unpredictable nature of events, the things even the most powerful ruler can't entirely control.
All those curveballs life throws at you. Sudden shifts in alliances, natural disasters, heck, even pandemics.
Exactly. Think of it as the inherent chaos factor in the game of power. Now, virtue, on the other hand, this is where the leader's skill comes in. Their cunning, their ability to navigate those unpredictable currents.
So if fortuna is like a raging river, virtue is about knowing how to, I don't know, build dams, divert the course, maybe even harness its power to your advantage.
A brilliant analogy. And, Machiavelli himself uses that very metaphor, the raging river, to illustrate this point. A ruler can't just stop the river, right? But with virtue, they can adapt to it, maybe even use its force to their advantage.
Okay, that's a powerful image. And it kind of makes me think of another metaphor Machiavelli uses, the lion and the fox. A good ruler, he says, needs a bit of both.
Now you're speaking Machiavelli's language.
Right. Like, you need the lion's strength to command respect, maybe even inspire a healthy dose of fear. But you also need that fox-like cunning to anticipate your opponent's moves, to outmaneuver them when necessary.
And what's so fascinating here is that Machiavelli isn't advocating for mindless brutality. He's arguing for a calculated, strategic approach to leadership, one that balances strength with adaptability, force with guile. Always choosing the right tool for the job.
So it's almost like he's whispering to future leaders, saying, look, the world's a messy place, and sometimes to get things done, you need to be willing to play dirty.
But always with a purpose, always with the greater good in mind. Machiavelli was deeply concerned with effective governance, and he saw virtue as the key to achieving it. And, when you look throughout history, there are certainly examples, aren't there?
Oh, I'm sure we'll get into some of those. And I'm guessing not all of them were considered the, shall we say, nicest guys in the history books.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. He was fascinated by rulers who, through this combination of virtue and, yeah, sometimes a bit of ruthlessness, managed to achieve extraordinary things.
So it's less about being Mr. Nice Guy and more about getting the job done, even if it means bending the rules a little.
Exactly. And Machiavelli, he doesn't shy away from those figures. One of his prime examples, Cesare Borgia, son of Pope Alexander VI.
Cesare Borgia, now there's a name that practically screams Machiavellian scheming. But didn't Borgia's story ultimately end in failure?
It did, and that's what makes him such a fascinating case study for Machiavelli. Borgia, you see, he possessed many of the qualities of a successful prince. He was cunning, ambitious, strategically brilliant.
He had that lion and fox combination down pat, but...
Precisely. But despite all that virtue, Borgia's plans were ultimately thwarted by factors outside his control. A cruel twist of fortuna, you might say.
Which brings us back to that raging river, right? Like, you can be the most skilled navigator, but sometimes the current just sweeps you away.
Exactly. Borgia's story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most cunning, the most capable ruler can't account for every single eventuality. That even with virtue, there's always an element of chance.
So what's the lesson here for aspiring princes, or really for anyone trying to navigate the complexities of power? Is it all just a game of chance? Are we all just at the mercy of fate's whims?
Not at all. The lesson isn't to despair, but to be prepared, to cultivate your virtue, to study history, to try and anticipate those challenges, and to be adaptable in the face of ever-changing circumstances.
So less about controlling the uncontrollable and more about, like, learning to ride the waves.
Precisely. Machiavelli believed that by studying history, I mean really studying it, those who succeeded, those who failed, and why rulers could gain a crucial advantage in the present. They could learn to anticipate challenges, to weigh potential outcomes, and ultimately make decisions that maximize their chances of success.
So it's like having a roadmap of sorts to navigate that minefield of power, understanding the pitfalls, the traps that tripped up others.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the prince itself.
Because ultimately that's what this book is, right? It's a guidebook for navigating those complexities drawn from history's triumphs and failures.
Precisely. And the thing is, even though it was written centuries ago, those lessons remain startlingly relevant today, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, whether we're talking about politics, business, even just our personal lives, these ideas of virtue and fortuna, of navigating unpredictable situations, of making tough decisions, they resonate on a very deep level.
It's about understanding the nature of power itself, the levers that make it work, the pitfalls that lead to its downfall.
So what does it all mean? What are the key takeaways you think Machiavelli really wanted readers to walk away with after finishing The Prince?
At its core, I think The Prince is a handbook for survival. A guide for navigating a dangerous and unpredictable world. A world, I might add, not all that different from Machiavelli's own time when it comes to the pursuit and preservation of power.
And what I find so fascinating, maybe even a little unsettling, is how it doesn't shy away from the moral complexities of leadership.
Right. It's a reminder that while morality is important, it's not always enough. Sometimes a ruler, a leader, anyone in a position of power needs to make incredibly difficult choices. Choices that might seem unsavory, perhaps even go against their own personal code. But it's all in service of a greater good.
Almost like Machiavelli's whispering to us, saying, look, idealism is admirable, but if you really want to make an impact, you have to be realistic about how the world actually works.
And that means being willing to make those tough calls, to take calculated risks, to adapt to changing tides, and, yeah, sometimes to play a little dirty.
It's a sobering thought, but an important one, especially for anyone who aspires to leadership or just wants to understand, really understand, how power operates in the world.
And that understanding, that awareness of the forces at play, both within ourselves and in the world around us, that's perhaps the most valuable lesson Machiavelli has to offer.
It's almost as if he's saying, look, it's a tough world out there. Saints and idealists, they don't always fare so well.
It's true. And to survive, let alone thrive, sometimes you need to be a bit of a lion, a bit of a fox.
You've got to be able to adapt, to play the hand you're dealt. So what you're saying is there's no one-size-fits-all approach to leadership.
Exactly. What works brilliantly in one situation might backfire spectacularly in another.
Because every challenge, every adversary, it's all different.
Precisely. Machiavelli, he was wary of those universal truths, trying to fit these complex situations into neat little boxes. True virtue, he argued, lies in recognizing the nuances of each challenge, adapting your approach to what the moment demands.
So it's not just about being strong or cunning, but also about being perceptive, right? Reading the room, understanding the motivations of those around you.
There you're getting it. It's like a high-stakes game of chess.
Yeah.
You've got to think several moves ahead, anticipate your opponent's strategy, but also be ready to adapt if they make an unexpected play.
And always be ready to sacrifice the pawn to save the king, which I guess is why Machiavelli put so much emphasis on history.
Because history is the greatest teacher, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And The Prince, it wasn't just his theoretical musings, was it? It's like it was rooted in these real-world observations of actual rulers, actual conflicts with very real consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Machiavelli was a keen observer of his time. He'd seen firsthand the rise and fall of these powerful figures, the successes and failures of all these different leadership styles.
And he took those observations, all those hard-won lessons, and he poured them into this, well, it's almost a cautionary tale, wouldn't you say? But also a call to action.
Precisely. He wanted his readers to grasp the true nature of power, that seductive allure, but also that potential for corruption.
It's a message that feels incredibly timely, even now, centuries later.
Because it's timeless.
Right. It's like, whether we're talking about presidents, CEOs, heck, even just navigating our own relationships. This whole dance between virtue and fortuna, between what we can control and those forces that are completely outside our grasp, it's something we're all grappling with.
And that, I think, is the enduring legacy of The Prince. It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about power, about leadership, about the choices we make in a world that's rarely black and white.
It's a reminder that in those positions, well, to achieve any goal, really, especially one as complex and difficult as leadership, it takes pragmatism, strategic thinking, and yes, maybe even a bit of that cunning we were talking about.
But there's another side to that coin, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Even with the best of intentions, the sharpest tools at our disposal, we're not omnipotent. We can't control everything.
Fortuna throws those curveballs.
Exactly. And sometimes, despite our best laid plans, our most valiant efforts, we're going to be challenged. We'll have to adapt, adjust our course, navigate those ever-changing currents.
It's humbling for sure, but also empowering in a way, don't you think? Because it reminds us that even with all that uncertainty swirling around us, our choices still matter. Our actions have the power to shape our own destinies.
And that is the ultimate message, the call to action that Machiavelli leaves us with. Embrace your vote too. Learn from the past. Face the present with wisdom and courage. And never, ever underestimate the power of fortuna.
You've given us so much to consider today, to say the least. History, philosophy, strategy. It's like we took a crash course in Machiavellian thought.
And yet there's always more to explore, isn't there? More to uncover within the pages of The Prince.
Which I think speaks to why this book has resonated for so long, why it's considered such an enduring masterpiece. Every time you read it, new questions emerge, new interpretations, new insights.
And who knows, maybe it's even inspired you, our listener, to pick up a copy, to embark on your own deep dive into Machiavelli's world.
Because as we've discovered, those lessons, they're not just for aspiring rulers, are they? They're for anyone who wants to understand the dynamics of power, the complexities of leadership, that eternal dance between virtue and fortuna.
And on that note,
we'll leave you to ponder the words of Machiavelli himself. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.